Man, what a year 2023 was for gaming. There are so many massive releases this year that, looking back at it, it is honestly crazy how people managed to fit in playing all these huge video games. It feels like 2 years worth of games have been released this year, and now as the year slowly settles down to a close and the truly stacked game release schedule for the year finally eases up, I decided to go through my list of shame and play some of the games that I've been putting off. And one of those games was Teardown. Now, to be honest, sandboxes aren't my thing. There are sandboxes I like Terraria, Rust, or Valheim, and other ones like Gmod and Minecraft or Roblox that I never really got into. I don't know why. I think the community surrounding those games aren't one I'd usually associate with, and I think that I just get tired of the game a little bit too quickly, or maybe it's something to do with the scope of the game, similar to what I said about survival games in my Wizard with a Gun review. But as such, the sandbox genre is one that I don't typically venture into. But Teardown is different. It doesn't seem to have as big of a scope compared to some of the other sandboxes, and given all the overwhelmingly positive reviews, I figure that if there were a time to get into it, this would be it, before February next year, where literally everything is getting released. And man, was I surprised with Teardown. How much I enjoyed the game, how fleshed out the game was, and how accessible it is. The campaign made the game feel very structured and provided a very clear path forward that I feel that some of the other sandbox games don't really offer. The map, the lighting, the sound design were all awesome, and the destruction and physics system in this game provided so much freedom as to how you approach each mission, while still being restricted by certain elements like equipment you had to what fail parameters there were for the missions, the map layout. It meant that I didn't feel as overwhelmed by this game as I have with other sandboxes in the past. It felt streamlined in a way, more focused, with very clear objectives and very clear problems to get to those objectives, which to me made Teardown very easy to get into. And this game has such a heavy problem-solving, puzzle-like vibe to it that it just ticks so many boxes for me that I couldn't help but gel with it. Overall, the experience I got from this game was awesome. And that's the thing, this game feels great to play. Blowing shit up, planning and preparing, racing against the clock. This game had so many different experiences within the game that it's hard not to get addicted to it or find something that you like. Teardown to me was a great way to round up a big year of gaming, and I can't wait to talk about it. At its core, Teardown is an indie sandbox voxel-based heisting game. You are a contractor of some sort down on your luck when you receive an email asking you to perform some shady shit for some corrupt individuals. In terms of gameplay, the game revolves around receiving different types of missions via these emails that you can access on your computer. It presents similar to a lot of those simulator games like Thief Simulator or Power Wash Simulator, you know, where you access a computer where an email tells you to rob this dude's house or to clean this van or to suck your boss's dick for a promotion. Actually, I might be getting my simulators mixed up. However, in Teardown, missions mainly consist of stealing missions, destruction-based missions, or some form of espionage, with tasks ranging from stealing cars, destroying certain buildings, hacking X number of terminals, you know, typical heist and espionage shit. That pretty much sums up the game from a story perspective, as there's not really much of a story to write home about. What story there is presents itself through these emails, where you're essentially stuck in the middle of various feuds between some high-value individuals, where both sides are using you to try and topple the other by damaging the other's property, or to steal stuff like the opponent's cars to try bankrupt them, to stealing secret documents, exposing the other to things like fraud. Although presented through these emails, which isn't really the most engaging form of exposition, for what it lacks in terms of scope and presentation, it makes up for in charm and humor, as it's pretty funny reading through these emails as they have this degree of absurdity about them. Like, not only is it funny being stuck in the center of these feuds where you can see the reactions of both sides, but also being the sole reason as to why most of their property gets stolen or destroyed makes these emails a pretty good time to read through. Like, one side tells me to steal some expensive cars and drive them into the river, and then the guy I stole from emails me being like, I know the other guy stole my cars, go destroy his dock, and then I go destroy the dock, and then the other guy's like, some dude just destroyed my dock, we need to get back at him. Like, it's funny knowing that you're the one instigating that. And as such, although there is a lack of story, what story there is a good time. It's very silly, and it's fun to read through, and adds a bit more charm to this game that is already overflowing with this sense of style and identity, and is more than the game really needs given how good the gameplay is. Loading into a mission, you're not really given much to go by other than a few tools at your disposal, and a map. Inspecting the map gives you an idea as to what you need to do in this location, as well as where all the objectives are, with most missions having both required objectives that need to be collected in order to pass the mission, and optional ones that grant you more XP that goes towards leveling up. Now each mission is broken down into 2 phases. The planning phase, where in most cases you are free to roam around the map and case the joint, looking for routes of entry and exit, taking notes of potential landmarks that might cause some trouble like rivers or dams or waterways, allowing you to plan out the most efficient route for you to get all the objectives. This is important as in the second phase, the escape or execution phase, no matter what the mission type, there comes a point where you will be forced to trip an alarm, setting off a timer that requires you to get all the required objectives and whatever optional ones you can if you choose to, and escape, turning the mission into a sort of time trial. Seems like a relatively simple and familiar gameplay loop, right? Well, what gives Teardown its depth and sets it apart from everything else is its insane voxel-based destruction physics system. Literally everything in this game is destructible. Cars, walls, entire buildings, you name it. If it stands, then it's most likely able to be brought down. This can be done through various means, like using some of the vehicles that are spawned throughout the map to punch holes in buildings, to clearing out entire lower levels, to using your ever-expanding arsenal of equipment which you unlock by getting those optional objectives and leveling up your character. Starting out, you spawn with nothing but a sledgehammer, blowtorch, and extinguisher, but as you move through the game, you unlock a huge arsenal, from pipe bombs and time C4 that are perfect for blowing apart walls, to planks and cables that you can use as tethers or to create alternate routes, to shotguns, rocket launchers, etc, etc. All of these have some form of functionality in the game, from being able to create new paths by destroying the environment, to helping to attach objects to one another with things like cable, making transporting specific objectives much easier. This is where the beauty and the depth of the game begins to surface, as in nearly every mission there is no way for you to collect all the objectives within the time limit without having to utilize this game's destruction system. Blowing a hole in a wall can save you significant time, as you no longer have to run around the building looking for the entrance. Positioning a car or using a crane to punch a hole in the second floor of a building cuts out the need to run inside and use the stairs, allowing you to access the second story from the outside, turning this game into almost like a pseudo parkour game, as you try and shave off as much time as possible, allowing you to collect all the objectives and reach the escape vehicle in time. It's these few seconds saved that make all the difference in a run, as in a lot of these missions, those few seconds were the ones that you needed in order to escape in time. And it's this gameplay and gameplay loop that makes this game so good. It's all planning and trial and error, as loading into a map there are multiple things you need to consider when planning out your route to collect all the objectives. Where these objectives are located on the map, whether they're in buildings, and what level they are on within these buildings, what entrances are available, what vehicles, the topography of the map, as well as where your exit vehicle is located in relation to all these objectives, all go into how you decide to approach each mission. There is a surprisingly large amount of planning that goes into this game, far beyond just destroying walls and buildings, to the point where I would say that the planning phase was as engaging, if not more engaging than the execution phase. The planning phase becomes so important and presents a lot more like a puzzle game, as you plan your routes, blow open new paths, set up vehicles, and modify the map to suit your approach. And paired with a quick save and quick load system that encourages this trial and error, it gives you opportunities to experiment, finding out what works, and in some cases realize your whole approach is wrong and that you need to try again from scratch. But that's part of the process, and you learn to plan your routes better and to scope out more of the map before you start going for each objective. And I found it often more worthwhile to take a few extra minutes at the start of the planning phase to better scope out the map, which resulted in less overall restarts. I'll admit, at the start of the game I did struggle a little bit with getting into Teardown, and I think the biggest reason for that was because I didn't know what type of game Teardown was. I said earlier that at its core this is a heisting game, because for the first hour I didn't know that. Going into this game, the only thing I knew about it was that it had destruction physics, its voxel art style, the fact that it was a sandbox, and that it was heavily driven by the modding community, which made me think it was something more along the lines of Gmod. And so not only was the fact that there was a campaign a bit of a surprise, I was also surprised about how big it was, and how varied it was, and how different each mission and run felt, even when set in locations I had previously visited. Teardown has a fully fleshed out campaign, and a good campaign, offering multiple locations with varying mission types and a lot of variety, which was a welcome surprise and a bit of a relief, as I was worried I would have to do some modding of some sort to flesh this game out. Something I've always had trouble with ever since trying to install Thomas the Tank Engine tanks in Left 4 Dead 2, as well as this monstrosity. I mean, yes, destruction is a major component of Teardown, but I think the biggest component of this game is how it forces you to use lateral thinking, particularly if you decide to go for completing all the optional objectives, which posed both a welcome and genuine challenge. This game is tricky, and some of the missions are hard, and I'm really happy that that's the case, because if it was too easy, I feel like it would make it feel less like a complete game and more like a sandbox, or more like an engine or physics demonstration or something. I always found that going for at least a few of the optional objectives are always worth it, if not just for the XP, but for the challenge as well. But in saying that, there were a few components components that I think the game does well that makes that challenge easier for one to approach. First off, revisiting maps. Now, I want to say that I think the map design in this game is awesome. Each new location felt like a real place. Well, you know, as real of a place as you can get with voxel graphics, but I mean like a legitimate place in this game's world. Each map felt purposeful, it felt planned out and orchestrated, it felt logical, like the layout made sense, and in doing so made the gameplay feel more believable and more tactile in a way. I loved that safari map over on Muratori Island, with its vibrant colours, leftover equipment and gear from people working earlier that day. Other maps consisting of harbours to little islands to beachside villas to shopping malls. Each space you play in has its own sense of personality, making them not only memorable and stand out from one another, but also makes them play differently from one another too. And paired with a pretty awesome voxel art style, as well as some truly great lighting effects and sound design, moving through these maps felt so good. You actively take in this location, and at no point did I feel like these maps felt static or stale, which is a testament to the map design considering that there aren't really NPCs in these maps, which I'll touch on later. I think another great thing the devs did was how they utilized the space within these maps in regards to mission design, with each mission set within the maps holding objectives located in different areas and different buildings compared to previous missions. This means that of the 3 or 4 times that you revisit a map, you're still likely to be introduced to a new area, causing you to have a different approach to this mission compared to the last. What's also great is that given how well the map is designed, you remember each map's layout. As such, revisiting maps, you can remember the layout from previous runs, being able to implement what you learned from those runs in the new mission. Like this mission here, where I had to flee from this helicopter. I was trapped, but I knew from a previous run that I could blow through this wall to create a shortcut to a crane that I knew was there, allowing me to escape. This means that as the game progressively gets harder with each new challenge, you're given a bit of a head start as you already understand the map and some of its components, meaning that you're rarely approaching a new mission blind. What further prevents this game from feeling stale is its mission design. I'll say that the main mission type we'll be playing is stealing a car or some documents or something, which remains relatively engaging given what I mentioned before about the map design, but every so often the game will sprinkle in a new mission type to mix things up, from a small racing mission to an escape mission to blowing up a food court with tanks and missile launchers. The game does offer a pretty fair variety of missions to keep you engaged. I think my favourite again were those Safari Island missions halfway through the game, as when you go there you leave all your equipment behind, meaning that you can't rely on the tactics you've been using up until this point, instead finding items in the world to use to complete all the objectives, calling upon a bit of lateral thinking and problem solving, and was a refreshing start to the second half of the game as it made me appreciate all the gear that I had acquired up until that point. Overall, this game surprised me in a lot of ways. I was surprised about how much I enjoyed the planning for these missions, taking my time in setting up equipment and leveling walls to create new routes, putting that quick save and quick load through its paces as I explored different approaches to new problems, enjoying the planning side of things just as much, if not more, than the actual execution. I was surprised at how much of a game there was here, and how much I was engaged with a lot of its components. And I can see why it's held in such high regard in Steam and why it has such a big modern community. The base game here is awesome, same with the Sandbox. However, this game is without its faults, though I will say that the faults I did have with this game were relatively minor. First off, briefly touching on performance, the game ran fine for the most part. There were only a few moments of stutter where I was blowing up a lot of shit at once and there was just a lot of debris and some environmental effects going on, but besides that I don't really have anything to complain about. Speaking of debris, there was a habit for your car to get stuck on like the smallest bit of debris or rubble. As a result, you had to spend significant time clearing up all the small particles and bits that were lying around, which was a little bit annoying at the start of the game, but then you unlock a leaf blower that lets you blow away all of this much more efficiently, and it stops being as much of an issue as you kind of plan around this debris. I think it also would be good if cash would be gotten from missions, not just from picking up the in-game collectibles. I think if the optional objectives gave you a bit of cash, that'd be good, encouraging players to pursue those objectives more. But also, to be fair, there becomes a point where leveling up equipment just feels a bit superfluous, so again, not a huge deal. Now, one of the more interesting talking points I want to touch on is the lack of NPCs in this game. It's tough to say whether this is an issue or not, as although NPCs being absent does take away a little bit from the maps feeling alive, the game also does a very good job without them. I think it's more a matter of this game could be even better if NPCs were in some missions, as it would open up a few more doors in terms of mission design and mission types. I think NPCs that you can't kill would be a good addition, like if you kill one or you drown one then the mission fails, which could make for some cool mission types like having to save NPCs from burning buildings using the destruction mechanics. Maybe there's like a mattress or some sort of inflatable gadget you unlock that lets you throw NPCs down safely from a height. That could be cool, and could work within the style of stories this game presents. Like maybe you start a fire at some factory under one of the guy's orders, and then the next mission his adversary is like, we have workers in there because they're supposed to be closed for the weekend, but he was forcing them to work overtime, and now you have to go in there and save them. Like, that sounds like something that would be in this game. And I think adding NPCs to some of the missions, not all of them, just some, would go to giving a bit more life to the locations, as you could literally just replace the robot guards that were introduced later in the game with human skins. Like, I don't think you would have to drastically change much of the game or its mechanics to fit this in. Just make it that the mission fails when they die. I think because of this, although great, Teardown missed a lot of potential. There could be such a variety of missions if NPCs were available. It would have felt a lot more like your classic heist game, hiding in plain sight, skirting around and dodging people. Like, none of the current missions have things like cameras you need to avoid. You'd think that these top secret bases would have at least have the bare minimum level of security. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is definitely a heisting game. There's no other category that this would fall under. I just feel like it's missing that one last component to push it over from being great to being truly awesome. Whether or not that's NPCs, I don't know. But you get used to the lack of NPCs, and it didn't stop me from enjoying the game. Actually, besides the robots, there was one NPC that made an appearance. One that was truly painful. The patrolling helicopter. For a select few missions, there's this guard helicopter that just moseys around the map, searching for you with its flashlight. And this helicopter is like fucking omnipotent. It will just find you no matter what. You can lure it away with a distant explosion with like a rocket launcher or something, but as soon as you step out into open air, even if the helicopter is facing the complete other direction and you are nowhere near its spotlight, it will just turn around and start gunning you. What's the point of having a spotlight if it doesn't designate the helicopter's sightline? And it slows you down too when it shoots you, meaning that if you aren't near cover, you're practically dead.
I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
Fuck, that shit was annoying. But besides those things, actually, to be fair, even with those things, I think this game is fantastic. It's rewarding, it's challenging, and has so much freedom as to how you approach missions that you can really play it however you want. I liked the planning loop, all the gear felt meaningful and had its own purpose, and the maps were so well designed that it more than covers for the lack of NPCs. I think for what it's worth, this game is absolutely worth checking out if you're a fan of 3D puzzle games or games with destruction physics. And what's more is that although this game is filled with so much chaos and destruction, within that there are these moments of peace and quiet that really let you take in what's around you. As you plan your approach, wandering through these beautifully constructed locations with all this atmospheric lighting and mood, the colors are vibrant and making the maps feel so memorable and familiar that if you do pick this game up, amidst all that destruction, steal a moment to take it all in. Teardown is truly one of the best that the indie sandbox genre has to offer, and I'm glad to have ticked it off my list of shame. Merry Christmas, everyone.